So I go in, they had seen my short film. This also shows you how different IP was at the time. First meeting cold. They're like, we really like your short film. How would you like to write Wonder Woman? And even funnier, I was like, nah. I just like, nah, it's just not really my thing.
Who's in the comic book movies?
Yeah, I don't know.
In the early 2000s.
It was going to be the TV show version, but even then, I was 27, 28, and I'm like, no, that's just not really my thing. Hey, welcome to Creator. I am Eric Kripke. I am showrunner of The Boys, and this is
Shawn Ryan, showrunner of The Night Agent.
And we are here to talk about the highs and lows, the agony and ecstasy.
There's ecstasy?
Yeah, the agony and ecstasy minus the ecstasy of showrunning television shows. Now, Shawn and I aren't just Hollywood douchebags who only pretend to like each other.
We're not just that.
We're not only that. We are actually former co-workers and co-showrunners. Co-creators of the NBC television smash medium hit of Timeless, which ran for 2 seasons in a movie.
2 seasons in a movie.
So let's talk about Timeless. Let's talk about how we met, I guess.
Yes. So I remember I think I got a message. I don't even think it was like a direct phone call. But I got this hey, Eric Kripke would like to meet you to discuss a project. And I'm like, well, I definitely know that name. I know that he's a real serious, showrunner but he kind of works in genre, and what is this about? And, but I was intrigued.
Yeah.
I think I had just maybe come home from Puerto Rico where we were filming Mad Dogs. It feels like the timing of that.
Yeah.
And I was like, it's a flyer, sure. And then I think, did you come in with John Fox or just by yourself?
I came in with John Fox.
So I thought I was just me and you, and then there's another guy there.
Right.
And I'm like, okay, what's this about?
Right.
And so my version of the story is that you had this kernel of an idea that doing a time travel show, which tied into this because I loved time travel movies. I love sci-fi movies, but I never really had the chance to write them, and people would put me in a certain box, and I immediately clinged on that, well, if I partner up with a guy who's known for this stuff, maybe they'll let me do it. And my memory of it is you just really had the basic nugget of doing this thing. And I think my suggestion is, well, why don't we just spend a week together knocking around what this idea might be. And at the end of that week, we'll know maybe if there's a show there, and more importantly, we'll know if we actually like each other.
Right, exactly.
I really didn't want to commit to more than a week.
I know. Yeah.
But you were very game, and you were willing to come to my office and make it easy for me. You were very kind that way. And my first memory of you was you were serious about your craft. And I liked that. I liked that you took the job seriously. I could tell you were ambitious, that you wanted, to create something good. And I think we were both, it's almost like, when I'm going back to love stories now, 2 people who both just had their heart broken. Yeah. And then they sort of meet and they're kind of good for each other at the moment. We both had gone through these solo showrunning things where all the pressure is on us.
Right.
And I think one of the questions I asked you, I was like, well, this, it's just a nugget, but it sounds very cool, but you're obviously extraordinarily accomplished. You don't need me to do this, so why me? And I think there was almost, something painful in your response. I just like somebody to share.
I just don't want to do this alone.
I just don't want to do it. And I was like, I don't want to do it alone either.
Yeah.
And so you really found me at the right moment in the headspace. And since then, we've gone on to do things alone.
Right.
But it was a glorious.
It was
2+
really
years
fun,
to know that
yeah.
there were certain things I could just throw on you, and hopefully that you could throw on me.
Yeah.
And we found, I just know that you were on top of the VFX, and I didn't have to worry about it. I tried to handle the music in ways that you wouldn't have to worry about.
Yeah, I thought we, and all that, by the way, that's all totally true. I had just started at Sony, and I came to Sony under the auspices of I had done nothing but network shows over at Warner Brothers, and they brought me in by saying, we really want you to do streaming and cable, and that's where I wanted to be. And then I came in, and then my first official "you're hired" meeting was but one network show though, right?
What hurt?
And I said, okay. And I had I had that. It'd be fun to do a time travel show because it lends itself to a weekly format. I said, but I don't want to do this alone. It's too hard to do something like that at that level. And so they presented me a list of the showrunners at Sony, and it's like just going through it. I'm like, Shawn's the biggest and best one. Let's cold call him, and we cold call you. And my memory was we cold called you, and then the word came back that you were open to taking the meeting, and my response was he is? What is he doing? Because in the genre world, we always feel we're these little kind of nerds in the back of the class, and you're the guy who made the shield, and we were like, what? What's he meeting with us for? And yeah, I thought you were smart and insightful, and it was a good meeting, and I thought it was wise to sit down for a week, and it was great. Yes, so moving on to actually running the show, I actually agree with what you're saying. I think we were good compliments because I think the things we enjoyed doing were things that the other person did not necessarily enjoy doing.
You like being in the room early in the process. I like to come in a little later and kind of react to stuff.
Right.
I really love to dig into editing right from the beginning.
Yeah.
Whereas you like to, I think, have somebody work on those director's cuts a little bit before you saw them.
That's 100% right. You like hanging out in the editing room. I like hanging out in the writer's room.
Yeah.
And
I like writer's room too, but I like.
Yeah, no, I
don't want to be there for the blue sky and the originating. If I have an idea, that I'll come into the writer's room and say, "Hey, let's work on something like this." But
right, but exactly. But I love the beginning of it. I love when it's all nothing, and we're just talking about well, what should the themes be, and then it just evolve. Where it's just there's no cake; it's all ingredients. That's really fun.
I learned a lot from you about metaphor and the way to use genre to tell stories that the audience clearly understands what the modern day implications are, but you're not really saying them out loud and all that, and which is very classic, I think, genre stuff. But since I hadn't worked in genre as a genre, I hadn't really delved a lot of that. I did a year on Angel early in my career, and that was part of it, and I struggled to learn and embrace it. And you really taught me a lot about that in ways that I've used going forward.
Oh, thank you very much. You taught me a lot about editing. I remember watching you in the editing room and really understanding where to find the meat of the scene and where to find the meat of the character. You also, it's interesting, we came at this business from sort of different interests. You always, and I don't know if you ever wrote plays, but you...
I did, that's how I started.
Right, but you always attacked it as a playwright, which I always really enjoyed. You were really interested in specifically the character and the dialogue and how that drives the story. And I came at it as a Spielberg geek, and so I was always about where's the big showy moment, and where's the set piece, and not that we're not.
You've directed a lot, whereas I've never directed.
Right.
And you sort of have a director's eye, and I think probably in the writer's room, you're already thinking about, maybe I won't direct this, but if I were, how would I direct it? Whereas I never think.
Yeah, no, I do, and I drive every director I work with crazy because I'm very like, well, but, you know, wouldn't you kind of be down here and then kind of, you know, like I'm just not.
Yeah. I think that's why directors like me, because I make very clear I have no aspirations to direct. And
right.
You're here because you can do it a lot better than me. And
yeah.
I just want us to agree on what the scene's about.
So then explain to me why you love tone so much.
I hate it.
You hate tone?
But it's necessary.
You're on tone. You have longer tone meetings than any human being on the planet. So, okay, just to back up. So tone is a meeting, but usually a call with the director where you...
Now it takes place on Zoom, but during the timeless days, it was
on the
phone.
And you go over writer intent over every single scene with the director, and you talk about the thematics and the character movements and the things you want to hit and not hit. And it can be for me, it can be like a 2-hour meeting. For you, it's like a 3 to 4 hour.
Well, one of the things I do also is that, and I've now kind of codified this, but I have about an hour and a half, because I just did this last week because we have a new director on The Night Agent.
Yeah.
And I've never worked with her before. And I have about an hour and a half pitch that's just talking about general stuff. And some of these general things, Netflix did a funny thing for my birthday like a year ago. They made these pillows with a lot of these sayings on them that they get, you know, like standing's better than sitting,
right,
and moving's better than standing.
Yeah.
You know, things like that. Pace, energy, urgency,
right,
are 3 words I'm always, you don't have to have all 3, like you can slow things down, but you have to still feel the urgency.
Right.
You have to feel the energy coming from people, at least in the shows I tend to make, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And so so I talk about that a lot. I've also talked probably more since our time with days, just about culture, about the culture of a set. You know, because ultimately a TV show and a set, anything bad that's happened is going to be partially my responsibility, either because I hired the wrong people or I didn't create a culture that made people realize that certain behaviors weren't acceptable. So now I spend a lot of time on that. I spend a lot of time talking about safety. You know, that at the end of the day, every actor and crew member needs to go home safe, and that we're only making a TV show and it's not worth somebody's health.
Yeah.
You know, so I have a whole speech and I have notes that I've written down now, and that takes about an hour and a half. And then, it probably takes at least a few hours to go through an episode. But again, it's never me telling them how to direct it. It's just, I want to make sure that they understand and that we all agree what the scene is about and what the subtext is and what the important moments are and what the money scenes are. I have a whole thing about money scenes, which is those are the scenes people remember a month after they've seen the episode. They won't remember the other 50 scenes, but they'll remember the 5 big money scenes, and that you can't treat money scenes the way you treat other scenes. You have to give them extra rehearsal time. You have to give them extra film time. You have to, sometimes you slow them down in the editing room to make sure they hit with maximum impact. So you thought I loved them. It's literally my least favorite thing to do. And now on The Night Agent, since we do 2-episode blocks, I'm doing double tone means.
It's a whole day.
It's like 2 whole days.
Yeah.
And I'm losing my voice by the end of it. It's not that I love it. It's just that I hate going to set.
Yeah.
I have writers produce their own episodes, and this is the way that I can make sure that the final product is going to be as close as possible to what I'm hoping for without babysitting on set.
Which I understand which I completely understand. My complaint about tone is the main purpose of tone is to sit in editing, watch that what you wanted didn't happen, and then say, but I toned it.
Exactly.
My
favorite snarky thing to say in the editing room is when I see a scene that's just sort of laying there, I go, I wish I had said something about pace, energy, and urgency in the tone meeting.
Right? Exactly.
Which I only say 10 times during a tone meeting. I wish I had said something about pace, energy, and urgency.
Yeah, no.
I'll have to remember that for next time.
I know. It's like you get to I think what's difficult about being a showrunner, at least from my perspective, maybe you have a different take, because you're right. Like I kind of came at it from, I know we're both filmmakers, but I came from it from a background of wanting to be a filmmaker, and you came in as...
Well, that was something I was going to ask you about that I was thinking, because I'm always asked by people, hey, should I go to film school? Should I do something else? And you and I took very different paths to Hollywood. You, from a very early age, wanted to be a filmmaker, and you can talk about your experience of going to USC Film School.
Yeah.
I went to a liberal arts college where, yes, I took theater and film classes, but I also took history and art history. I was a joint economics and theater major, so I took econ classes and computer science classes and everything. And I'm convinced there is no one way to do it, and you and I are examples. So you give me the sell of why, if you want to be in this business,
film school,
go to film school.
This is not going to be a very convincing sell. I think, we're both from the Midwest. I'm from Ohio. You're from Illinois. For me, in my experience, the best part about coming out to Los Angeles to go to film school wasn't the actual curriculum. It was getting a foothold into this city, being able to PA, being able to intern at production companies, being surrounded by like-minded people that are doing exactly the same thing, and creating a community before you had to worry about getting a job. That was really useful, and it's still useful today. I mean, last Wednesday, I went out with all of my film school friends 30 years later, and, we're all working one way or another in the business, and we all have supported each other. When during The Boys, we had in season 3, we got to film this cameo with Charlize Theron, but we had to do it in LA. So I called my film school buddy, who's a DP, and I said, I need you. And he dropped everything and came out and shot it with me. And so the value of having a tribe, it gave me a support system, is what I would say. What about you?
Well, my argument for a liberal arts education would be your approach, to use a movie reference, one of my favorite movies, Breaking Away. That's like taping the guy's feet to the pedals. Like, we're not switching riders again.
Right.
We're
going all the way.
This is it. That's going to film school to me. That's betting everything on black.
Right. Yeah.
and I get it works out. What I liked was that I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do when I was 17 and entered college. I was really into sports. I was a soccer player. So here's everything I did in college, which did not land me a tribe in Los Angeles, did not land me all such connections. It landed me alone, because every one of my friends from college mostly stayed on the East Coast. And so it was very isolating afterwards. But what I was able to do, I was able to play, 2 years of soccer in college. I was able to write 3 plays that got produced.
Yeah.
I was able to make 3 or 4 short films as part of film classes. I had different radio shows on the college radio station that I had. One was a sketch show where we would write sketches and perform them and do prank phone calls and, our version of comedy at the time. And then I was studying history and economics, and I was studying these things that in my opinion, gave me a wider base of things to write about.
Yes.
When it came time to write. Now, certainly, I think, a place like Middlebury, where I went, it's getting better now as more and more Middlebury people have sort of worked in the industry. But when I came out, not many had. And certainly, the USC Mafia in Los Angeles is a real thing.
It's actually a real
It's a real thing. Yeah. And I was always jealous of that aspect. So again, I think it depends on the person. You had much more of a focus and knew exactly what you wanted to do going to college, whereas I really didn't. When I arrived at college, I'd never written a creative word in my life.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
And I had acted in some plays because I went to this tiny high school where you did everything. So I'd been exposed to theater, but I had never written anything and never thought I could write anything. And I was able to discover myself at a school. And maybe I would have discovered myself in something else. Maybe I would have discovered myself in banking or environmentalism, So liberal arts education gave me the chance to find myself.
Yeah, I did. I mean, it is true that, I found like my break in very, very early. I got to be the flavor of the month when I was 24. I had films in Sundance and Slam Dance, and I was like this, I had this month where I was like this hot young filmmaker, and I went on all these rounds of meetings, and I sit in front of all these executives who like love your short, love it, and I'm like, great, and they're like, so what do you want to do? And I'm like, I don't know. I've spent all my time getting into this room with you right now. And they're like, well, what do you want to write about? I'm like, I don't know. My goal was to be here. And once you realize that if you are actually in the business, as you said, of having something to say and having an opinion, and I came home from that and it came and went, and then people had moved on to the next thing, and I didn't really translate it into, I didn't parlay it into anything, and I was like, oh, I blew it, and I had to realize, so I did a certain amount of building the plane as it was in flight, where I was like, oh, I gave myself a liberal arts education. I started reading all the books I should have been reading, and I went to Europe by myself, and I just started realizing oh my God, I really need to know more than camera lenses. And
I still don't know camera lenses.
They're great. Super useful on the day. So tell me, because I know you worked, I know you worked on Angel, but is it fair to say your first big job was Nash Bridges?
Yeah, that was my first staff job. I'd done some freelance work for a couple years before that, and I was able to actually call myself a professional writer because I was living on $10,000 a year in the 90s in Los Angeles, tutoring kids in math for the SATs, and while trying to write. I had this weird, again, I did so many things the wrong way. It's amazing that I somehow came through this. I had this weird belief that I don't want people to know me as an assistant. So I don't want to get a job in the industry and try to work my way up. I want to have jobs outside the industry where I can support myself, and then tutoring math, it paid pretty well. So I only had to work 30 hours a week doing that in order to survive, and then that gives me time to actually write.
Yes,
I'm just going to write script after script after script. When I meet people, they only know me as a writer. They won't know me as the PA over here. I have since then employed and given their first job to so many of our assistants.
Yeah, right.
And I realized, that was probably the better path to take. But, and it probably took me longer as a result. But yeah, so I had gotten some freelance work, and then in the same week, I had 2 meetings. One was with Joss Whedon for Buffy the Vampire Slayer season 2, and then the other one was for Nash Bridges. And both shows I hadn't seen before I heard about the meetings. And both shows I did crash courses to learn as much about the shows as I could going in. And very quick, I was like, oh, this Buffy show is really good and really interesting. And Nash, I was like, there are parts that are really funny, and I like it, but it's not a show that I would necessarily, normally go on my way to watch. In fact, it's the same time slot as Homicide: Life on the Street, which is really one of my favorite shows. But I learned everything I could. And then I had this meeting with Joss Whedon that I thought was really good. And at the very end of it, I used the word penultimate. And in the car going home, I was like, did I use the word penultimate in the right context? And I went home and I looked it up in a dictionary and realized I had used it wrong. And a couple days later, I did not get the job. And to this day, I'm convinced that it was because he was like, this Moke doesn't even understand what the word penultimate means. He wants to hire his right. And I was very bummed. But then I got the call that Nash Bridges wanted to hire me. And that was just everything. I'd moved to Los Angeles in January of 1990. And this is May of 1997.
The very first writer's room I was ever in was a room I was running. It was so bad.
Because I thought I didn't have a lot of experience when The Shield started.
Oh.
Having only spent 4 seasons and 88 episodes or whatever of TV under people who really knew it in Carlton Cuse and John Worth and Joss Whedon and David Greenwald and Tim Minear.
Oh, yeah. So I had gotten like a few... feature writing gigs. And so at the time, I was kind of known as a feature writer.
The cool feature writer who, can we lure him to TV?
Right. Right in those days, right?
Yes.
And it was like, and I wasn't really getting anything made. And then my agents were like, well, Warner Brothers wants to meet with you for TV. And this shows you the difference of the time. It was like, television.
Whereas me, that's all I wanted to do.
Right.
Because I had grown up watching TV.
I wanted to be a comedy feature director. That was what I was working towards. But the problem was I turned out to suck at it. So I go in. They had seen my short film. This also shows you how different IP was at the time. First meeting cold. They're like, we really like your short film. How would you like to write Wonder Woman? And even funnier, I was like, nah. I just like, nah, it's just not really my thing.
Who's in the comic book movies?
Yeah, I don't know.
In the early 2000s.
I mean, it was going to be the TV show version that David E. Kelly ended up doing. Yeah, but even then, I was 27, 28, and I'm like, no, that's just not really my thing.
So, I saw that last year you were named one of Hollywood Reporter's 100 most powerful producers.
I know. Thank you for noticing.
And I can't help but wonder if someone with as obviously a twisted mind as you deserves that much power. No, it's a credit to everything you've done with The Boys and the spinoffs. And I was actually with you at the origin of The Boys.
Yes.
Because we were making time. Wes and I kept hearing about this thing you were doing.
Yeah.
Both the highs and some of the tribulations with certain notes. I was hearing about it takes like, was it 6, 8, 9 months to make these superhero costumes?
Yeah.
You know, and I was seeing you go through it, but I didn't see a lot of it. So how did that come to be?
So it was one of the main reasons I went to Sony was chasing that title because I had met with Neil and then Neil Moritz, a very prolific producer in town, and Ori Marmer, who worked for him at the time, who's now at Netflix, and they had the property. It was written by my favorite comic book writer because I'm a comic book geek, and I just like wanted it. And
Neil had a deal with Sony.
Yeah, Neil had a deal with Sony, and I don't think they had finished the rights yet, but it was like on its way there. And so I said, well, hell, man, I want it. And it was everywhere I wanted to be. It was going to be cable. It was going to be hard R. It was really irreverent. Around the same time, Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg were circling it for their company and were interested in directing it. And so we met up and we all got along. And so we decided to do it all together. That was beyond the usual craziness of we wrote it for Cinemax. Cinemax ultimately didn't have the budget to make it. Cinemax let it go. Amazon was just ramping up a genre division and they needed material ready to go. And then bought it. What was interesting about, and I'm sure you have this on Night Agent, is we're both old school in that we come out of network television. And I'm used to, 7-day breaks, 8+1 shows, 22 a year. Now I'm in a world where they pick up the whole season at once.
Write them all first. Go into a super long prep.
And you have a lot of money and a lot of time, but for some reason, it's not enough money and it's not enough time. And on one hand, it was just so great to be able to pull that stuff off. On the other hand, it's wild to me how water seeks its own level. And I put probably as much effort, blood, sweat, tears, and stress in those 8 episodes than I did in a 22, 23 episode season of Supernatural. So how did you find the difference between, I mean, you did it much earlier, right? Because how many episodes did S.H.I.E.L.D. do a season?
13 generally.
Right.
There's one year where we did 15.
Right. Well, that's a lot more reasonable than that 22 episode grind.
Yeah. But the standards are higher. Serialized storytelling is so different than episodic, something like SWAT, which I do, or Supernatural, where you can be breaking multiple episodes at once, because even though there's serialized personal elements, there's sort of standalone cases or sort of stories, right? On the S.H.I.E.L.D., every writer would be working together on one specific episode, and you couldn't even contemplate going to the next episode until everything was broken about that episode. So it would take longer.
So how does it work on Night Agent?
It's serialized.
Yeah.
So again, everybody's working on it. We try to have a plan. Part of my job as a showrunner is to try to come in with some ideas and direction, so that it's not just people shooting the shit for the first week. So for instance, season 2, my plan was always I wanted to do season 2 in Europe of The Night Agent. And we'd finished season 1. The episodes are all on the cam, but it's not premiered yet. But Netflix feels good about the show and what they've seen, and so they actually ordered an early writer's room. So the reality is we had to start writing season 2 before season 1 even premiered. Right. And we didn't know what was going to happen with the show and everything. And so I talked about how I wanted to go to Europe, and I got this very, polite, nice message back. Well, we think this show is going to over-index in North America, and we really think, maybe you should stay in North America. Up to you, of course, but up to you, of course. So, and I was like, okay, I hadn't committed too much thought process to, to the European thing, or even what country it would be. So I was like, okay. So like my job as a showrunner is to come into that day one of the room. So what I came in with were a couple of things. I was like, listen, Netflix doesn't want us going out to the world. How do we bring the world to us? And that's where I came up with the idea of, well, let's build a season around New York City and the United Nations. And, and I had this idea about, I thought one of the successful things of season 1 was that, Peter was this the lowest level person working in the White House, who then becomes very important over the course of the first season. And I liked that dynamic, and his circumstances had changed, but I came up with this idea for a young female Iranian aide to the mission to the United Nations, but who's looking to defect to the United States with her family. But so she's she's in the lowest level position in that important place, but she becomes sort of very important. So like I came in with like that idea, right, along the way, and I came in with a couple other sort of nuggets, and then some of the returning writers came in. So you come in at the beginning of the season with a direction. I always compared it to, I know I'm going to do a car trip from LA to New York. There are different ways to get from LA to New York. I don't need to know all the stops along the way, but I do know that like, I'm going to want to hit Denver on the way. I want to go through the Rockies, not through the desert. I want to see so, okay, we're going to head this way. And then as you take that trip, then you find the little stops along the way. Oh, that looks like a nice restaurant to stop. That looks like a nice little plot thing to do in this episode.
You want to know what's interesting about that metaphor is multiple interviews I have said exactly that, claiming it as my own. And just now I'm realizing that I got it from you. So
I probably got it from somebody.
Yeah.
So you're filming or getting ready to film the final season of The Boys.
Yes, we are in the middle of the final season of The Boys.
So what are the challenges landing that plane?
I am in a fair amount of terror about a series finale. You can count on one, maybe two hands of like the truly great series finales, of which, by the way, well done. I think The Shield is one of them.
I'm proud of that one, yeah.
And conversely, when the graveyard is littered with terrible...
I studied a lot of series finales before doing The Shield.
Yeah, and I've been studying them too. And it's like, you could have the greatest show, and for years, but if you stiff that ending, and that's what's sending everyone out in the parking lot, they go, oh, maybe that show wasn't that good.
I think some people feel about Game of Thrones like that.
For sure. I mean, and I know you know him a little bit, but poor Damon doing Lost,
and Carlton.
Yeah, and Carlton, there's Damon's still...
I personally really like the Lost finale.
Yeah, but he got so much shit for it. He's still writing op-eds about how I'm trying to explain the Lost finale. And so I feel deeply okay, how do you tie up the stories? How do you do it in a way that is emotional and satisfying? How do you do it in a way that creates frankly, the illusion that some detail that you dropped in season 1 or season 2 is now suddenly coming back to pay off? Because I know people on the Breaking Bad to me is as good as a show gets. And I was able to ask some of those writers, I'm like, I mean, the way you tied everything together, how did you do that? And they said, oh, we had just a list of loose ends on our board that we had no idea what to do with them, that we would keep compiling over the seasons. And then when it came time to do the final season, we would just start checking them off of how do we pay them off? Because we're going to look like geniuses because the season 2 storyline becomes this. So that I would say has been a big challenge. The size of it,
Is there a temptation to just go bigger and bigger each season, or do you temper that a little bit?
I do my best to really wrestle that down. I want it to be, we always say we want it to go deeper, not bigger. But there's inevitably just because you need to find a new way to do an action scene, or you need to find a new superpower, or, the trick is so it doesn't inflate so much that it becomes a parody of itself, because it's already a parody. So you just really work to just really keep it grounded. How do you keep it emotionally true? My process in the writer's room, you probably remember to a certain extent, is I always want to break the emotional arcs before I break the plot arcs, because my feeling is a plot turn or a set piece is
know what the hero's journey is before figuring out what dragon they slay.
Exactly, because all that stuff's a dime a dozen, but it's but if it's not a metaphor for what the character's emotionally going through or some political point you want to make, then it's just empty. It's just floating around. So I would say that is my biggest fear and challenge. It's been fun though, because you get to waste people in a way that you couldn't do before.
Yeah. Now the final season of The Shield, we're not saving anything.
Yeah.
We can really do whatever we want.
Right.
We're not
You're not
saving
just
something for season 8.
Yeah. You're not just keeping characters alive. You just even confrontations between them where you're well, they'll never survive that as a relationship. You're great, right? I don't owe that for next season. All right, so what about you? What are the biggest challenges of season 2?
We're making season 3 right now.
You're shooting season 3 right now.
We're in the middle of shooting season 3.
Right.
The challenges are kind of self-inflicted, I would say. So there were things that I had to do for budget and schedule purposes in season 1 of The Night Agent, some of which was green screen driving scenes. Which just personally I dislike.
They're the worst.
Our team did as good a job as you can do on them, and they're passable, but they're not ideal.
Right.
And so I have this theory, as we're seeing more and more CGI and AI, and maybe this is more wish than theory, but I have this theory that people are going to start coming back to the things that feel real and tangible in TV shows and movies. And so I was we've got to shoot this car chase practical and old style.
Yeah.
Right. Real driving. And it's, people will judge for themselves, but I'm really incredibly proud. But it took about 48 hours of filming just between first unit and second unit stunt unit to shoot all the stuff for about a 3.5 minute car chase, but you are with the actual characters in the actual cars in the actual city of Istanbul.
Yeah.
And there's one shot in particular that our actor, who is the best actor I've ever worked with when it comes to stunts, Gabriel Basso. There was a big promotional thing that they showed during the Netflix Christmas Day game of him parachuting out of.
Yeah.
He was really parachuting. He does that stuff.
Man.
And he had trained beforehand. He did this stunt driving the car that we just have a single shot in the back seat of him backing up and then doing a full 180.
Yeah.
And it's so visceral and real. But it was a real challenge to pull off. The other challenge for us is that unlike The Boys, which maintains most of the same characters, a lot of the characters are changing each season, and the problem, the case is changing. So it's almost like a pilot each season in terms of casting all these new characters, building new sets. The old sets go away. The new sets come in. New cast comes in. But that's, I think, what makes it fresh. And that's
it's sort of the fun of it. I mean, I'm always struck by whenever you feel comfortable that your show is working and you know the ingredients, you have to immediately change it. And we do that
it feels predictable then.
Because then it's predictable.
Are there things that you've thought about cutting either at script level or in editing that you didn't and then realize afterwards that was the right decision?
For sure. I mean, the one, and this will sound silly, but it ended up being like a really iconic moment in The Boys, is in season 1, we shot Homelander, Anthony Starr.
He's so great at it.
Masturbating on top of a skyscraper.
As one does,
saying, I can do whatever the I want over and over again. And we shot it as in the particular context of a particular scene. Amazon gave us almost no restrictions season 1 or ever, but we got the most season 1, and they just could not get their head around that scene. And so we had to cut it, and I was upset. Anthony was upset. We thought it like really defined the character and the tone of the show in a lot of ways. So season 2 rolls around, and
now you're a huge hit.
We're a good hit.
Oh, huge hit.
And then there's this moment at the very end in the season finale where what was scripted, and I think we even shot it like the blue screen, like on wires, it was supposed to be Homelander was going to be in space and he was going to be looking down on Earth, with like this cold disdain. And you're like, oh no, he's up to shit. And I think we might have even put it in a cut. Anyway, the notes come from Amazon and they say, it's good, but we're just looking for something that's just got like a little more excitement. And I'm like,
hey, we got some footage for you.
Yeah, no, and I didn't tell them what it was going to be. I was like, you know what? I think I know how to fix that note. And I just dropped it in and shipped it to them and like was just so curious what their reaction, because there's a part of that where it's like, is that just a you?
Right.
But they called me back. They're like, it's perfect there. And it really became this like kind of iconic moment in the show. So how much of the job for you is creative versus managerial, and not just managerial with the actors, but managerial with everybody?
So interesting, I would say, and this sounds like it's a bad thing, but I actually find it to be a good thing. At the beginning of a show, season 1, there's more creative. But at least the way I do it, when you are a mentor and you are teaching a group of writers how to write the show, they are able to do more and more as the seasons go on. Yeah. Right. And so I would say that there's actually less work. Like I remember back in The Shield, the easiest season by far for me was season 5. We had this murderer's row of writers who've all gone on to be showrunners. And I had to come up with less of the creative for what was probably our best season of the show. And I could what it meant was overall less work for me.
Right.
But the percentage shifted a little bit more towards managerial. But my life was so much better overall. Yeah. Right. Whereas in the first season, I think as a showrunner creator, it's really incumbent on you. I mean, I came up with a whole document that helped get the show picked up, where I laid out what every character was going to go through. I had a whole grid, all the characters and then all 10 episodes and bullet points of things they would go through. We ended up only using about 50% of that, but that was a ton of work, creative, that I had to do to give a template for these writers. And then as they work on the show, season 1, season 2, now in season 3, I'm probably contributing less creatively than I did in season 1, season 2, because they are really stepping up, I would say. Did you find something similar or different?
No, that's actually...
And then you're dealing with not sequels, but you're dealing with spin-offs and everything in the middle, and so I don't know how your time's getting
No, I mean, look,
there.
The first season of The Boys was definitely the hardest one because... And I had a wonderful staff, but it's like I'm learning how to do the show. They're learning how to write the show. It was also... You
don't have directors yet that know the show.
Exactly. And then also...
The actors are still learning who they are.
And then on top of all of that, we were a tone that sort of hadn't been done in television before.
Yeah.
And so...
Makes it so great.
And so the amount of, like, Amazon saying, well, you can't imply that the deep a dolphin, for example. And like you
so
would have laughed.
Later you pair them with an octopus.
No, yeah. Well, by then they were cool with it. You would have laughed at how hard I pushed back on that. Where like I was like, well, I'm going home then. Because if you don't want him to a dolphin,
then what are we even doing?
What are we even doing here? I'm like, then clearly we're not making the same show.
No, but it matters to you.
Right. Well, it mattered to me in terms of like, this is our tone. You have to be reckless and insane. If we're going to pull our punches, what are we doing? Why are we making this? And so there was an incredible amount of, intensity, second guessing, kind of fighting, and then, but we ended up, winning more than we lost. And then the show was on the air. And then, it's helpful when it works. And I agree with you. I don't think there's no executive that's like twirling their mustache. They're just trying to figure out how to make a hit as much as you are.
And they have a very tough job because it's hard for them to prove to their bosses that they're doing a good job.
Right.
Other than what the final product of the show is. And if they see something they think could be better, they're going to say something. They're going to care because they're worried it could be their asses on the line.
Yeah, absolutely. And so once it worked and they saw, it's like everyone breathes a sigh of relief and it creates like a lot more trust. And then you start, like you have a staff of 5 writers and maybe one wasn't one that worked. And so you bring in somebody. So by the 3rd year, 4th year, you have just these amazing writers who know the show, know you. And to me, it's the time bank. And you're either making deposits in the time bank or you're making withdrawals. Yeah. And when someone can deliver a draft, I mean, that's what it comes down to, right? Like they can just deliver a draft where
or the great story idea in the room.
Yeah. And you can look at it and say, this is going to take me 4 hours to polish rather than 2 weeks. Yeah. And that's just so much time now that I can focus on talking with an actor or working with a director or all the other things that we have to do as we're getting pulled in a million directions. I found you, when we worked together, so polite. For the guy who made The Shield, I was like, oh, he's going to be tough. And you are tough. You have strong opinions and you're willing to fight for them. But like you, with executives and with actors, you were very savvy about handling them politically, where I would be like, well, I just need to tell them they're stupid. And you would say, I was surprised at like how much more willing to be a dick I was than you, who I thought was a lovely gentleman, while still getting across your thing.
I didn't view you as a dick. I've also learned a lesson, which is never. I've learned this the last couple of years. Actually, it's just never react to notes the day you get them.
Yeah.
Sleep on it.
Yeah.
Reread them in the morning, because now it's interesting. It used to be that they would give you notes verbally, and you might have these awkward moments. You might react a little angrily in the moment, and then I think they realized, let's just deliver these in a cold, harsh,
black and white document.
And they can stew on them. So we now tend to get these notes in email, and now I'm just like, I'll just scan them real quick, and then I'll just. Okay, I'm not even going to pay attention to these until tomorrow, because I already see a couple that are driving me nuts. And then, oftentimes they drive me less nuts the next day. And then if they still are driving me nuts, I've learned, well, I can reply in email, and especially editing notes. If they have a suggestion, and I never lie and say we did this. I actually do. We tried it. It didn't work. We tried it. It didn't work for me.
Yeah.
I never say it didn't work. Didn't work for me.
Right. Interesting.
Which is true. Maybe if I did it and show it to them, they would like it. But for me, it didn't work for me.
Yeah.
And usually if they have a suggestion, I'll try it.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
So I talked about how I believe that there might be this yearning for things that feel a bit more real. But your show is sort of a masterclass in VFX, and you've got superheroes, blah, blah, but how much has technology changed from when you started the show to now, and where do you see it as an advantage in ways that maybe I don't?
I mean, I do. Look, we rely on, obviously, visual effects a lot on The Boys because it's a genre show and it's a superhero show. Effects have gotten significantly better. Even over the 6-7 years that we've made the show, in terms of just like what you're able to mount, the cost of it, because the more that the costs go down, the more shots you're able to afford, the better the action sequence or whatever it is. I think that it all depends, right? I think it's a tool, and you have to look at it as a filmmaker's tool, or an artist's tool. I don't love the term artist, but just because it makes me feel nervous about myself. But as a filmmaker's tool, for example, in The Boys, I give the note more than any other note of that doesn't feel real. That has that washed out CG feeling. And for example, we learned, it took us until about the second season where we learned that the problem that we were having in terms of making it feel real was we weren't putting the camera mistakes in, and the fact is when you shoot, and say you do a snap zoom, or say the camera comes around, it gets the composition a little off. The focus might buzz just for a couple frames.
But the VFX shots are perfect. And I said, we have to start making accidents. And me and Stephen Fleet, who who worked on the Timeless pilot. And so we said, well, let's start making accidents. And so the light would flare just when you needed the shot to be great. Or we came up with one almost by accident where it was we're in a reflection of the mirror, we're in a window reflection and a superhero was landing, and it was almost that wasn't meant to be the angle where it happened, but we decided put it on this angle, let her come down in a dirty window, which is a bad reflection, and then let the cameraman rush to get her, but get there a little too late. Now you're speaking my language, because in my Tomies I always talk about how I prefer reactionary cameras rather than anticipatory ones, and how it feels more real.
And that you can take all those lessons of documentary filmmaking and what you're saying and verite, and add that doesn't have, just because it's a VFX scene doesn't mean that you shouldn't be shooting it that way. Because that ends up making it feel much, much more real. The first guys to do it was Battlestar Galactica.
Yeah.
Like if you watch, that was genius, because it's like they were taking, actually, I'm pretty sure, I haven't talked to them, but they were taking camera moves from The Shield, and they were putting.
I've heard that. I haven't confirmed that, but I've heard that.
But like,
that there was some internal talk about that's The Shield.
They have like an armada and spaceships flying around, but they're like coming in on,
trying to catch them.
Yeah, and they're trying to catch them.
I love that show.
The other thing that I think is a real difference and is going to be a real game changer are these volume stages, which are basically the giant LED walls.
Yeah.
We're using them now in a limited capacity.
I'll have to learn from you because I'm suspicious.
Here's where they're great.
Yeah.
Is because I haven't. You can't do a car scene with green screen. You're not allowed to do them on my shows. You're just not allowed, just because I'll be so sad.
Yeah.
And but they really work great on a volume stage. And
car scenes. Okay.
And you'd be hard pressed to tell the difference between that and a tow when that is happening. So even in like small ways that you're not thinking of, there are real improvements, because obviously if you can put a car on a soundstage and have it be stationary,
you can worry about performances and get more takes and everything,
and not have to do, not have to be on some sort of tow.
Yeah. I've actually started to use it more for performances where you split the screen.
Yes.
And you've got the one person here, but I'm not getting, this person's great, but I'm not getting exactly what I need on this person. But in this other take, we had the right thing. And
you're combining takes exactly.
So I'm a little bit of a hypocrite, and I'm guilty of using some of this stuff.
No, I mean there's no reason not to use the tools that you have, as long as the end result is the thing that you're actually trying to make. Yeah. Okay, so when you're not a fabulous and successful showrunner, when you go home, when you walk the 1.5 blocks from your office.
It's 2.5, Eric.
To your home.
It's 2.5.
What is off the clock Shawn Ryan like?
I always talk about the curses of showrunning.
Mm-hmm.
I was explaining this yesterday to the writers of our new show, is that, listen, I have a curse as a showrunner that I can't stop thinking about the show.
Right.
I try to stop thinking about the show, but I always have to have my mind open for when the idea comes. And I want you people to share that curse with me. Another curse of being a showrunner is that, if you want to do a good job and you have shows in production or in prep, you don't really have a lot of time to do a bunch of other stuff. I try to get away and golf once a week now. I work out to try to stay healthy. I read. I'm a big sports fan, so I watch all my Chicago sports teams when I can. Try to eat a nice meal every couple weeks.
Yeah, right.
But I'm not really, I would say, drowning in the spoils of success.
Like Scrooge McDuck, like diving through your money.
But I'm doing what I like. I mean, I learned during the strike, like, I don't like not working.
There's so much I'm going to miss about The Boys when it's over. One thing that I'm not sure I'm going to miss is the stuff that you fill up on for inspiration in that show is the news. And we've all had to become news junkies because we're writing in a weird way, like it's probably not that different than what it was like when you're on like The West Wing or Veep or something. Like you're so deep into current events. The depth with which we're into every coming and going of just like what's going on in modern politics is exhausting. And after 6 years of it, I will be happy.
Like a break from the news?
I just wouldn't mind to read things that are like fictional and be inspired, by people who are expressing hope. It would be nice. Yeah. I would look forward to that.
What's next for you? Is it expansion of the universe? Are you excited to go into a different universe? What, as you're plotting your next 3-5 years of Hollywood conquest, what are you envisioning?
I mean, I'm still a little in the weeds on season 5 because once we do all the post and visual effects, I still have about a year on it. So it's a little hard to pick my head up. But we have coming right on the heels of that, we'll be shooting this prequel show, Vought Rising, that takes place in the 50s. It's being run by one of our really talented executive producers, Paul Gralong, and I can just sort of, check in and, be there a couple hours a week. And
what could go wrong?
Right. Well, I love it. It's like I've been waiting my whole career to be that drive-by producer that I always hated.
You've been working on all week. Don't like it.
just drop them and then squeal away, and then they have to
gotta go to Spago.
Yeah, exactly. So once I'm through the weeds on season 5, like when it's just overseeing them, it will be time to figure out another universe. And I am excited about, just that, different mode of thinking. And so keeping, all the Vought, called the Vought Cinematic Universe, keeping all those shows alive, being like the bald Kevin Feige, the shady bald Kevin Feige. The part that I'm still trying to figure out is, I think, I can't remember whether I learned this from you, so I'm just going to say it, is just trying to figure out like what's a good story. And no matter how many times, I mean, I've broken north at this point of 200 hours of television, and I still, every time, and that's part of why I like being in the room early, because every time you look at that blank board, you're like, oh, we are going to fail.
So screwed.
We're so screwed. And there's no way I know how to make a good story. And somehow, and I'd say the only thing that's changed between being on Tarzan and doing it now is now I have the confidence to say, like, it'll be okay.
One of my first bosses, Shawn Worth, said something very similar very early in my career. He said 2 things. One is the secret to getting rich in Hollywood: don't get divorced. And then the second thing he said is, it never gets easier the further you get into a career. The only thing that changes is your knowledge that you'll eventually be able to do it.
Yeah. All right, so what about you? What do you have on the horizon after Night Agent season 3?
By the time anyone sees this, I guess it will be announced that we have a new show picked up called American Hostage at MGM Plus.
Congratulations.
That is based on a podcast. John Hamm is producing with us and will star in it.
Amazing.
He starred in the podcast, and so I've been working collaboratively with him for a couple of years now, and finally got a green light on that. So very excited about that. I've got some wonderful partners on that, and then I'm writing a pilot that is at early stages that I really can't say anything about. But it's a world I haven't seen in TV before, and I'm excited about it. I hope I don't shit the bed on it.
I'm sure you won't.
Well, we all think we might.
I know, but
right?
every time. Yeah. All right. So, what is the one thing as a creator you're still working on, or that you don't totally have a handle on yet? Even with all your success.
I know it's about not having a handle, but I would say it's confrontation. I'm not naturally a confrontational person. Now, confrontation can have a negative implication, like I'm going to confront you. Mm-hmm. But I think confrontation just means addressing a problem in a timely way. Mm-hmm. And I, early in my career, fooled myself into thinking, well, if you ignore it, a lot of times the problem goes away and you never have to deal with it.
There's some truth to that. Sometimes.
And sometimes it does.
Yeah.
But then other times the problem mushrooms and it becomes a bigger thing. And one of the things I've been working on that I think I've been better on is just a certain degree of radical honesty about, hey, something's not working here. Mm-hmm. Or I'm not seeing from you what I need to see from you, so let's talk about that. Mm-hmm. And confronting that earlier on and trying to prevent problems rather than solve problems.
Yeah.
I would say. What about you?
That's good. Well, I mean, just that I agree with that.
I never got the sense that you had a problem confronting problems the time when we worked together.
No, I learned, my dad was, a businessman, and I always, had that part of my brain, and he taught me, you can say almost anything to anyone if you say it calmly and respectfully.
Yes.
I used to think that it was oh my God, I got to get into a fight and then I'm going to lose my temper. And I lose my temper once every 5 or 6 years, because you can just sit down and explain, and people actually like honesty when it's presented respectfully.
And if there's an opportunity for them to adjust the behavior, and they know what the standard is that they need to meet. I want to know what the standards are expected of me.
Yeah.
In all seriousness, I could do this for hours more.
Yeah.
So this is the end of the creator to creator session. It's sad that it required this to bring us together.
I know,
because the thing is, you work so closely together with somebody, as we did for 2+ years, and then we go and we've both had success, and it's been wonderful, and I've loved watching you be successful on this thing that I saw you at the beginning of. But to me, when I talk about what I'm going to remember when I'm retired and near the end of things, I'm going to remember the relationships.
Yeah.
Even more than the episodes, I think. And so, ending it up, I just want to say that I loved working with you. I always appreciated you as a person and a co-creator of Timeless, and I wish nothing but the best for you.
The feeling is not mutual. No, it's all so mutual. It was the best part of Timeless for me was working with you. The success that you have had and continue to have is well-deserved, and no surprise at all.
So thanks, and keep making shows I like to watch.
Yeah. You do the same.